Our story begins shortly after an Acclamator-class assault ship was able to break through the blockade on Umbara thanks to a Republic starfighter squadron led by Asohka and Barriss, destroying a Magnificent-class star frigate. However, both the Jedi starfighters were damaged by the Providence nearby, just before they were able to destroy the Munificent. So they requested to land on the Acclamator, and their request was granted. The starfighters would need some repairs, so some of the crew on the ship would get to work on it. While they were on the Acclamator, Asohka and Barriss were invited to join the briefing, seeing that Obi-Wan was going to attack the south while Anakin was going to attack the north. So since Asohka and Barriss' starfighters were under repair, they offered to either help Anakin or Obi-Wan, or both of them. Anakin stepped up and said that the two Padawans did a really good job on Geonosis, as they were the ones who blew up the Geonosian factory on Geonosis when he and Luminara couldn't. Not to mention, Anakin had a high trust for Asohka nowadays, so Anakin suggested that they go with him and help him take the Citadel, as they could probably get an opportunity to sneak in and sabotage the capital with the help of Fives, of course. Obi-Wan agreed with Anakin, as he knew better than to say no to Anakin, and so he and Anakin would contact Master Tin to inform him of these changing developments. Master Tin replied with saying that it was no problem and he would handle the air operations. Besides, it meant he could challenge himself as a pilot. Anakin and Obi-Wan nodded with a smile and transmissions ended. So Anakin and the two Jedi Padawans, Ahsoka and Barriss, would board a gunship with some of the 501st clones after the 501st and 212 went their separate ways. The landing would be rough, but Ahsoka and Barriss would stay close to Anakin just for safe measures. Then, after Oddball and another Y-Wings bombing run on an overrun Umbaran Ridge, Pong Krell's gunship landed near the three Jedi. Krell informed Anakin that there's been a change of plans and Anakin was to be sent back to Coruscant, which really confused Anakin as he couldn't just leave his men or Ahsoka and Barriss, but they assured him that they would be fine. So Anakin told Ahsoka and Barriss to listen to Master Krell as they would be staying here with the clones. Krell advised that they should go with him, but Anakin said they were very capable, and they'd be much helpful in being able to take the capital. So Anakin went to the Acclamator to either talk to Palpatine or the Jedi Council, as he was concerned about Ahsoka and Barriss' safety, as they were almost killed on Geonosis together. Plus, Anakin knew that Luminara wouldn't even care if she lost her apprentice, but he did, so he would see if he could negotiate with the Chancellor. While this was happening, Ahsoka and Barriss already had some suspicions about Krell, as the moment Rex introduced himself, Krell was already showing an aggressive disdain to Rex and the clones. Part of this would be seen when Ahsoka and Barriss killed two flying creatures that attacked the extremely exhausted clones, as they could sense the creatures were coming at the clones, which Krell, of course, asked if the clones wanted to stop and play with the animals. Another problem Ahsoka and Barriss had with Krell is that they tried to ask him to let their men rest, as they had been keeping up his intense regiment pace for 12 hours. But he would just do nothing but ignore them. Aboard the Acclamator, Anakin hadn't been able to leave yet, as Master Tin had actually been struggling to break the blockade. As while Master Tin was an exceptional pilot, Ahsoka and Barriss being taken out of the air battle meant that it was going to take longer to break the blockade. That got Anakin wondering how Pong Krell was able to get through the blockade, but he also had a lot of other concerns, like Ahsoka and Barriss being Umbara. Yeah, sure they had Pong Krell with them, but if anything happened to those two again, Anakin couldn't forgive himself. Not to mention Rex, Obi-Wan, most of the people he cared and loved were fighting on that planet, and Anakin was just going to be sitting around waiting and hoping the blockade would break. So he decided he would inform the Jedi Council that it would take time for him to return to Coruscant due to unforeseen conditions. So Yoda would go inform the Chancellor that it may take a while before Anakin could return. But after the call ended, however, Anakin decided it would take too long to break through the blockade, and he couldn't just sit here and let all his friends die. But another thing that was plaguing him was that he could sense Ahsoka's frustration with Krell for some reason, so he decided to return to the ground and fight with his men. And the way he did this was by requesting to the deck officer to go back down to the surface. It was advised against, but Anakin was the general, and his orders were final, so he was allowed to go back down, and would be sent down on an LAT gunship that was escorted by two ARC-170 starfighters. And after a bit of searching, he would find Ahsoka's position and would lay waste to a part of the road that was a bit ahead of the clones. And once that area was clear, the doors would open and Anakin would do a front flip out of his gunship, while the two clones who were with Anakin on the gunship used attachment cables to zip down, and the Umbarans were too distracted by recovering from the unexpected attack. Anakin would jump from tree to tree, killing off the Umbarans, which in turn provided cover for the clones on the ground. He would tell them which directions the Umbarans were at, so the clones would fan
fan out and go in all different directions, killing off most of the Umbaran forces that ambushed the clones, forcing the Umbarans to retreat rather than the clones. So Anakin would meet up with Asohka and Barriss, who were also helping take out the Umbarans that were on the road, after Asohka and Barriss covering the beginning of the clones' retreat. So when Anakin met up with Asohka and Barriss, he asked them what was going on, and they told him that the two of them weren't meant to be on this road as they disobeyed orders from Krell, only because Krell was sending these clones into battle, wouldn't let them retreat when they were clearly outnumbered, when they were clearly outmatched. Many more troopers were being slaughtered than they should have been. And if Anakin thought that was bad, Krell wouldn't even let the men rest. He treated them as if they weren't even human, which to Anakin just sounded like slavery, and he was prepared to confront Krell about this, but Barriss suggested that they just monitor Krell, and with Anakin here now, they could start using better strategies. His strategies. Anakin, Asohka, and Barriss would help cut down the Umbaran tanks that were constantly ambushing the clones, with Fives and Hardcase sneaking off to take the airbase that Anakin of course allowed, and the clones would be allowed to get much needed rest thanks to Anakin fighting Krell on that. As for Anakin and Krell, they were constantly butting heads with the battle against the Umbaran tanks, and with Fives and Hardcase taking over the airbase. Besides that, the dual hemisphere support vessel would still be destroyed, with Hardcase unfortunately sacrificing his life to make sure it could be destroyed. And Krell couldn't really do much because Anakin was getting in his way. On the inside, Krell was feeling extremely frustrated as his whole plan felt like it was falling apart because Anakin, Asohka, and Barriss, who were not meant to be here with him, were constantly making it hard for the Umbarans to beat the clones. So he had one more trick up his sleeve. He would alert Anakin, Asohka, Barriss, Rex, and the 501st that there were Umbarans using clone armor to attack the airbase, and once he tricked them, he tricked the 212 clones into thinking the same thing about the 501st clones, saying that Umbarans dressed as 501st clones had taken over the Umbaran airbase, and that he needed reinforcements. He also made the 212 think that Anakin, Asohka, and Barriss had betrayed the clones too, but luckily no clones would have to die because the 3 Jedi who were making their way to the battlefield convinced that the Umbarans in 212 clone armor were not Umbarans, they were actually clones. So Rex took off his helmet and he would go out into the open in order to stop them from attacking, while Anakin, Asohka, and Barriss told everyone in the 501st to stand down, explaining to them that the Umbarans were not Umbarans but clones as well. And Rex would do the same thing for Waxer and the 212. And once it was all sorted, everyone was just shocked that they'd almost killed their brothers, and Anakin would ask Waxer what was going on, which Waxer explained that Krell had told them that they had betrayed the Republic and were working with Umbarans dressed as clones. And obviously before Anakin and Waxer talked, Rex had explained to Waxer and the other clones that the 3 Jedi were not traitors working with Umbarans. Once everyone had realized this was all Krell's doing, it all finally made sense to everyone in the 501st. He was purposefully killing clones. But why was he trying to kill the clones and the Jedi? Anakin had only one conclusion. He was a separatist and a traitor to the Jedi Order. And this whole time he'd been purposely slowing down the whole campaign in order to make sure the Umbarans could win and the Republic could lose. So Rex would make a rousing speech for the clones and gave them the option to opt out, but they all stood to attention, which was their way of saying that none of them were going to opt out. Make their way to the command bridge of the airbase, and Dogma would stay with the other clones rather than betraying them. And so the clones with the Padawans would surround Krell, and Anakin would stand in the middle of the door of the command bridge so they could prevent Krell's escape. The Jedi would ignite their lightsabers to make sure they could defend the clones just in case Krell did something erratic. And Anakin demanded that he explained his actions, as what he was doing was not the Jedi way. The Jedi way, he said, laughing. The Jedi were nothing but fools, and they with the clones will lose this war. So he pushed the clones to the sides of the tower, but the Jedi would keep themselves steady and then move in to fight him, which he ignited both his double lightsabers. But Krell would try to escape, which would fail immensely, as for some reason he couldn't even move. But he was allowed to turn his head back, realizing that Anakin was the one holding him back with the Force. And then Krell was starting to feel uncomfortable, as he could feel the hate and anger coursing through Anakin, as if Anakin was about to use the Force to completely crush him. But luckily for Krell, he would be stunned by Fives, who was able to get into position and found an opening. Anakin would let go after Asohka put her hand on his shoulders, calling out to him to let go of him. Anakin would then thank Fives, and Fives would give an "anytime, sir." Krell would be locked up in an Umbaran prison cell in the airbase, and Rex, Anakin, Fives, Asohka, and Barriss demanded that Krell explain to them why he would do any of this. So Krell just responded with how the Jedi and clones were going to lose this war again, but added that the Republic would fall and a new order would rise, with him being a part of it. In his words, he had foreseen it. Part of why he told the 5 Republic members this was because he feared Anakin's raw power in the Force, and he knew that he would be forced to tell him. But he didn't give
every single detail. Not that Krell knew all the details, but in this moment he could see that he could potentially attempt to turn Anakin to the dark side, which he would try, but it would fail because Anakin wanted nothing to do with Krell. So Krell would be executed by Anakin after he found out that Krell had sabotaged their communications and that the Umbarans were potentially coming after them. And part of this was the realization that they needed to stop Krell from escaping. But luckily for them, the Umbarans weren't coming after them because Obi-Wan and the 212th had taken the capital, with the Umbarans surrendering with the help of some of the 501st and some of the Air Force, as well as Umbaran ships that were still at the airbase, with a few tanks as well that just so happened to be around. And with all these forces, they were able to push through the blockade above and finally wipe out the Umbaran militia and the CIS. In the aftermath of the fight against Krell, Obi-Wan and Anakin would deal with the incident after taking the capital of Umbara. And those who got the information from Krell told Obi-Wan about his vision, and it was very interesting to Obi-Wan because Dooku had told him on Geonosis that the Sith controlled the Republic and hundreds of senators were under his influence. But now Krell was saying something similar. They decided it was important to tell the Jedi Council about this development. And so Anakin, Asohka and Barriss would be sent back to Coruscant with Obi-Wan, while Kit Fisto would be sent in to help Saesee Tiin finish the air battle of Umbara. Once the Jedi got all the information, they believed it was possible that it was Palpatine who could have been behind all this, as from what they could tell, he was very influential to the senators and many senators supported him. So Yoda, Opa Rancisis, Mace Windu, and Obi-Wan Kenobi would wait until Palpatine had another Senate meeting. So when Palpatine had his Senate meeting to talk matters about the war, the Jedi Task Force would investigate Palpatine's office, with Plo Koon guarding the outside of Palpatine's office, just in case Palpatine figured out the Jedi were there. They would look through his call history, but would find nothing, as Palpatine always deleted any calls he had with Dooku. But luckily for the Jedi, they were able to find Palpatine's lightsabers. So the Jedi decided to steal one of the lightsabers so they could prove Palpatine was a Sith Lord, just in case Palpatine tried to frame the Jedi for whatever reason. So it was time for Plan B. They called it the Rako Hardeen plan. However, this time they had the intention of killing Palpatine and ending the Sith once and for all. So Obi-Wan would fake his death, but after, he would reveal himself to Anakin and Ahsoka that he was alive. And he apologized for not telling Anakin about this plan, but he had to fake his death in order to sell Anakin and Ahsoka's grief to the Separatists so they could make this plan work. Anakin could be annoyed, but he understood the importance of this, so he would find it within himself to forgive Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka would do the same. So Anakin and Ahsoka agreed to be a part of this plot, and Anakin would give some really good advice to Obi-Wan that he needed to get within Dooku's ranks, that whatever the Separatists were planning with Palpatine, he needed to be in the center of it. He needed to be leading the operation, as it was probably the best way he could get the most amount of information. So pretty much most of the events would still occur. However, Obi-Wan would kill Moralo Evol by pushing him into the flames that were just in front of Moralo, as this was the best chance at leading the operation, so he could get a better look at Dooku's plan. At least that's what Dooku seemed to have been hinting at, after he forced Moralo to fight Obi-Wan / Rako Hardeen. Now Obi-Wan didn't want to do it, but the Jedi were trying to assassinate Palpatine, not save him, so he needed to pull all the stops in order to make sure this worked. But he was able to detox when he got a chance. But he also didn't do it out of hate and anger, so he was still able to sell it to Count Dooku that he was Rako Hardeen, not Obi-Wan Kenobi. And this actually was more helpful, even though Dooku still had a few suspicions about Rako Hardeen. Dooku would have Rako Hardeen lead the upcoming mission, so when Obi-Wan had a chance, he would alert the Jedi Council of his plans, as well as Anakin and Ahsoka, of course. But once the Jedi were aware, they would set up the final stages of their plan. Obi-Wan would deduce that Dooku could be in 3 possible locations, and a part of the advice that Anakin gave Obi-Wan was to make sure to check for any listening devices. Not that there was any, because Dooku didn't get a chance to, because Rako Hardeen was always there with Dooku. So now came Palpatine's Festival of Light speech, and when Duran blew up the shield generator with his tentacles, Obi-Wan, with his sniper rifle, shot Palpatine in the head and immediately snuck off to find Dooku, which shocked everyone. Palpatine knew something was awry, but he couldn't do anything about it because he would be exposed as a Sith, which is exactly why the Jedi waited for this moment and planned it out as best as they could. And Anakin would put on a great performance pretending to be upset by this and chased after the bounty hunters to look like he wanted to stop them and avenge Palpatine. And Obi-Wan gave the location of the hangar, so when the other bounty hunters made their way to the hangar, they would all be arrested by the Jedi. That was one of the places he believed Dooku was at. But after Obi-Wan left his position, he noticed that the lights were off in the Theed Palace. So he alerted Yoda, who was hiding on the planet with other Jedi, and they would go to confront Dooku, who had just found out that Palpatine had been assassinated, which surprised him, but he just decided to adjust and leave the planet. However, that would be difficult because Rako Hardeen entered with Yoda, Plo Koon, Barriss Offee, and Anakin Skywalker, and they were all ready to put an end to the Sith once and for all.
all. Now, Dooku was wondering why he was with the Jedi, but he only wondered this for a few seconds, as it all made sense when he saw Obi-Wan's lightsaber. They seemed to have figured out that Palpatine was his master, by the looks of it. So he would try to escape while defending himself from the Jedi, but Yoda would block his escape path by flipping over Dooku, and he would be surrounded. He would put up a good fight, but would be defeated as Plo Koon used electric judgment on him when he had an opening. And this was not out of hate, of course. And it would not kill him, but simply render him unconscious, in order to capture him, as they needed to end this war once and for all. The Jedi would cover up their involvement with the Rako Hardeen plot, and would explain that Rako Hardeen managed to get away, but they were able to capture the other bounty hunters. They also explained that they found Dooku in the palace, who would later explain to the Senate that he and his master, Darth Sidious, Sheev Palpatine, orchestrated both sides of the war to create an empire from the ashes. He then explained that he hired the bounty hunters in order to construct a plot to kill Palpatine, as he discovered that Palpatine was going to betray him and rule the new empire on his own. So Dooku had hired Rako Hardeen to kill Palpatine, along with other bounty hunters, but unfortunately, after the plot was successful, the bounty hunters and himself weren't able to escape as they were captured by the Jedi, which the Jedi were able to explain that they noticed that the communications in one of the Naboo hangar bays weren't active, and they noticed that the lights were off in the Theed Palace. And with the help of Padme, they provided all the necessary evidence that Mace Windu and a Jedi task force were able to collect from Serrano not too long after the capture of Dooku that they were able to get out of Dooku, thanks to them getting the codes from Dooku, not by his choice of course. And so the public would somewhat accept this, as they were still very shocked that he was some magical evil force wielder. And after the Senate case, Dooku would be locked up in the Jedi. Later, Obi-Wan would reveal that he had survived Rako Hardeen's attack, and it was by the Force that he had survived. This was of course after Obi-Wan regrew his hair and beard, and got his face back to the way it used to be. And the story the Jedi orchestrated was that Obi-Wan had managed to find the Jedi, but he had to stay in hiding, just in case Rako Hardeen found out he was alive. And with the assistance of the Jedi, Padme would end up becoming the Chancellor, as many in the Senate believed that she was the best candidate after her bravery with assisting the Jedi, and she was the one who almost ended the war as well. And for her election, she gave a very powerful speech that would help her win in a landslide, as most senators wanted to end the war. After becoming the Chancellor, Padme was able to make a peace deal with the CIS government, and the issue for the CIS government was that there was no point in continuing the fight, as they lost their leader Dooku, and Dooku was the one who was stopping the war from ending, besides Palpatine of course. However, the CIS government made peace with the Republic, but the CIS military did not make peace with the government, as Grievous felt betrayed by the Sith and the Republic, and the CIS government just assumed everyone was out to get him. So he took command of the entire military, and he would round up all the CIS leaders, both corporate and government, before they could shut down the droids, and he would have them all executed. And with the full CIS droid army under his command, he would launch an all-out assault against the Republic. The Republic didn't have enough forces to hold their own against Grievous and his military, but the Republic had a trick up their sleeve, as when the Jedi went to Sereno, part of the data they stole from Dooku's castle was the location of the secret CIS reserve fleet. So the Republic and Jedi had taken a small fleet out with some Republic astromech droids such as R2-D2 to reprogram the droid fleet and army, and they would use it against Grievous's CIS military. The way they did this was by combining their own forces with the reserve fleet, just to make it clear to the people they were liberating which ship was on whose side. And the real Clone Wars was about to begin, and it did. Across the Outer Rim and Mid-Rim, Grievous's large droid army, which he called the KDA, Kalish Droid Army. Grievous was very surprised to see these fleets, but he would fight on regardless, and he would order them to destroy those droid ships that were with the Republic ships. And as for the droid ships that were a part of the Republic fleets, they would be called the Republic droid fleets. And the Republic would actually be able to gain much ground and protect the core, as well as the Inner Rim, expansion regions, and the colonies. As now, the Republic had a large CIS droid army, combined with their smaller quality fleets, it made it much easier for the Republic to win battles and take very little sentient losses. However, there was one small challenge, which was Admiral Trench, who would be under Grievous's command, as Grievous saw him as a very important ally. But that wouldn't be too much of a problem for the Republic later on, as Trench would unintentionally end up in a second fleet battle with Anakin Skywalker, the 501st, and Admiral Yularen, as well as Asohka, of course. And Yularen was able to call out the KDA's fleet tactics and alerted the rest of the Republic fleet that this was Admiral Trench's fleet they were fighting against. So Trench would end up being defeated, as Anakin's 501st fleet was one of the biggest fleets in the entire military, as his unit was the most effective unit out of all the clone units. So when you have a massive fleet led by someone who recognizes your tactics, and led by someone who is reckless and takes high risks just to win a battle, you're in for a wild challenge, which unfortunately for Trench was a challenge he would not survive, as he would ultimately be surrounded on all sides and would end up going down with his ship, as he was not able to escape in time. During this time, Obi-Wan would go to Raydonia, where Maul and Savage had massacred an entire village. But this time, Obi-Wan would go with Yoda, as they decided it was best that he went with Obi-Wan to make sure they win this fight. Delta Squad who were available were sent as extra reinforcements to Raydonia, as they were the best commandos in the entire Grand Army of the Republic. The Republic team would arrive at the planet, and Yoda would conceal himself with Force Stealth, and when he saw Savage waiting in position to surprise attack Kenobi, he would stop Savage once he jumped off the building roof he was hiding at. And Yoda would hold him with as much force power as he could, and Sev would successfully be able to shoot Savage in the head, as the Deltas had also found really good hiding spots. Savage knew they were here, but he assumed that Obi-Wan was to be dealt with first, and Maul was too busy with Obi-Wan not understanding how skilled the Delta clones were. Maul would be shocked and furious to see this, and then he and Obi-Wan would engage in a fierce lightsaber duel. The other clones prepared to kill him, but Yoda stopped them, as this was still Obi-Wan's fight, and he needed to finish what he started. So Obi-Wan would use Form 3 and let Maul wear himself out a bit, and then Obi-Wan would strike Maul down with Form 5, Ataru. And with that, the Sith were finally defeated. As for Savage, Ventress would be allowed to keep him, as he arrived just as Maul was killed, and it was a peace gift between the two sides. And after that, the Jedi would thank Delta Squad, and they would all go back to the war. The war would last another 2 months until Grievous attempted a desperate assault on Coruscant, as his forces were starting to crumble. But the assault would fail, as the Coruscant defense fleet was stronger than Grievous had hoped. But Grievous would do considerate damage, and he was starting to win until Obi-Wan and Anakin's fleets came in to assist, and Grievous would perish with his fleets in a fierce and large-scale battle close to the size of the Battle of Coruscant from Revenge of the Sith. But Grievous would not escape, as he would be encircled by the 3 Republic fleets. And after Grievous's defeat, along with the rest of the KDA, the Clone Wars would come to a climactic end. War, the Republic had lost most of the CIS reserve fleet, and many of their own Republic ships as well. But they had much of the Outer Rim under their control, so they would use what was left of their military to protect the galaxy. During this process, they would end up wiping out all criminal organizations, including Death Watch, and all the clones' inhibitor chips would officially be removed, as well as the Kaminoans all being arrested, after being forced to solve the accelerated aging program for the clones, which they would, and the clones would be able to live out their lives for a lot longer than they originally would have. And the clones would be allowed to either stay in the military or leave, and go live out their fulfilled lives, which most of them would. And as for the former CIS corporations, they would be significantly reduced and forced to bring supplies out to the galaxy, which made things a lot easier for the civilians affected by the Clone Wars and the effects of the KDA. And while many people could fear the droids after Grievous's attacks, the Republic continuing to use the remnants of the CIS reserve fleet would show the people that a droid's programming is only a reflection of their creator. And over time, the galaxy would heal, with Anakin and Padme having children after Padme eventually stepped down as Chancellor, but her effect on the galaxy for centuries to come, and Padme would leave an amazing mark on the galaxy, and it was all thanks to the work of Asohka and Barriss fighting with Anakin and the clones on Umbara.